to make a contribution on behalf of Tasmanian Labor and indicate at the beginning that we will be supporting this amendment bill, the Industrial Hemp Amendment Bill 2024. And in doing so, I thank the Minister for her contribution. By the content of the contribution and by the submissions and any consultation that's happened around this, it's a fairly common sense, administrative, make things a bit better amendment. And I think that's all good, and I appreciate the briefing that I had on this amendment bill. But when you read through the submissions, one of the things that I want to ask and get some clarification around at the end is the submission from the Industry Association. There still appears to be a difference of opinion or interpretation, understanding or I suppose intended effort or willingness to make some significant changes. So all of the language around supporting growth, supporting innovation, being able to use all of plant and seeing where we can make the most of the industry in Tasmania, those things have been supported by these amendments. But in reading the submission from the Industry Association and speaking to members, there is a belief. I do thank the department for the briefing, and I understand the position that was given and why these changes weren't possible or didn't happen in this, but there seems to be, from further conversation, I suppose, a difference of opinion in that area. But just tracking through what this amendment bill is, I agree it does make some things clearer and easier. It is important that we can figure out how we can make the most of all of the plant, the whole of plant, so that we can have a successful industry and a thriving industry in Tasmania. And all of those things are important, but when it comes down to priorities, I think there is a single area of effort that industry would like to see, and that goes around that single convention piece and how it interrelates with other acts, and I'll touch on that at the end. I think in considering this amendment bill, it's also important for anyone that in the community that's following along, or people that are looking to get into the industry or are a member of industry and wanting to best understand the environment, what this actually does do and what is industrial hemp in Tasmania. So the additional flexibility is appreciated. Yes, it does aim to support growth. It also provides for the granting of the industrial hemp licences for the purpose of horticulture. It does that renaming of the special licence and the special research licence. It makes more efficient the assessment of the applications under that sort of special research licence element. It has the inclusions of police officers under the definition in terms of inspectors under the Act. It has the provision for the Secretary to direct actions where the crop has been tested in those very few, and I think you reinforced that in your second reading speech, that there are very few occasions where there is a crop tested above that 1%, but in the event that that does happen for whatever conditions and reasons, there has been that provision there for the Secretary to direct actions. Also, with the provisions for the Commissioner of Police, the inclusion of those definitions around fit and proper person and responsible officer, and that piece as well around the transitional provisions around the Industrial Hemp Amendment Act. So to assist with that transition from special licences to special research licences. So it does all those things, and that's useful, and it does make things clearer. But in terms of being able to, I suppose, really underpin and provide that next step change, there was just that one piece that was missing. I was interested to learn that, and you, Minister, mentioned a few reasons why there was a peak some time ago, but where activity peaked with 1,500 hectares with around that value of $5 million. Globally, the value or the potential value of this industry is significant, and the Industry Association believe that we could benefit in a far greater way in terms of that adding to that farm gate value in Tasmania, in terms of what the potential of the industry is. So I think it's important for us to do whatever we can to make sure that we create that environment. We've clarified, or you've clarified, the interaction with other acts, considered risks, and I'm interested in that piece in terms of, as a state, how risk averse we are, or how willing we are to continue to lead the way. You mentioned quite rightly that Tasmania has led the way in this area, that we have been at the forefront of the development of industry here, and as with a number of other areas in Tasmania, we don't want to lose that leading edge by being too risk averse. And I think it is true that both growers, industry representatives, they do want to see that we can get the maximum value out of our crops, and there's no doubt that there is big value to be realised in Tasmania. It's important to clarify and put on the record when speaking about this. You talked about the things that it doesn't do in terms of medicinal cannabis or recreational crops, those sorts of things. And for everyone, it's not clear what industrial hemp is, but industrial hemp, it is the same plant, but it has those very low percentages of the compounds in it, and I think that's what's really important. So, and sometimes it's as easy to decide or to define what it's not, and I was interested in a fact sheet to read in a plain English sense that industrial hemp is not legal cannabis plants used for medicinal purposes, and that's not industrial hemp, and neither is it illegally growing cannabis plants for recreational use. In Tasmania, we do have a good industry based around horticultural use, food, fibre, but also we've got a really great industry around construction as well, and where we're leading the way in that. Food products, whether it be from the seeds, from the seed oil, fibre products, and people wanting to work more closely together to be able to use the whole of plant in their enterprises. I wanted to thank the people that made submissions. There were a number of submissions made to this, including individuals. One individual focused around the fibres, outlining the different uses and the way that they use that, whether it be for textiles, paper, fuel, plastics, body care, when you talked about those resins and things at the end as well, horse bedding of interest, building materials. So it was great to have an individual's perspective. We got the organisational perspective from Tas Farmers, and they made a particular comment to say that Tas Farmers, they were TFGA at the time, but Tas Farmers believe that it's crucial that the Act supports the advancement of the industry and doesn't hinder potential future growth. And I think that in that they were sort of underlining and supporting the position of the Industry Association. We had a submission from Hale Farm that welcomed the clarifications, were grateful around recognising horticulture as a permitted use. And then a submission from Plantwell, and also the two submissions that I want to focus on, and that is from the Tasmanian Hemp Association and the submission from the Australian Government. And this was the most interesting part of the briefing, thank you, but also the area that had the most interest, I think, where there was a clear difference in a positioning. So the Hemp Association submitted to the original review in 2020. You mentioned 2021 when this process started, and then there was some initial time to put in the submissions in 2022, and they were at that time talking about the meeting that had happened in December in 2020 with the United Nations, and in their submission they write the United Nations removed cannabis from Schedule 4 of the 1961 Single Convention on Narcotic Drugs, and the non-THC compounds found in the plant are no longer scheduled under international drug conventions. Many states and other nations have already taken bold and decisive action to bring outdated legislation in line with current community and scientific views around this stigmatised crop, so innovative businesses can thrive. And so in their submission, they believed that that convention had been amended. And as I understand it, the Australian government submission was potentially sought to specifically respond to that. And there was a letter included in the consultation, and it says that it should be noted that while it's recognised that the low THC extracts for cannabis contains little or no psychoactive THC, the Single Convention does not control cannabis or extracts based on the THC content, but rather on what the intended use of the cannabis is for, and generally limits this use to medical and scientific purposes. But further in their letter, it's interesting to me that it says, I note that the United Nations Commission on Narcotic Drugs held a vote in 2020 to consider a threshold for the THC in preparations to clarify what substances are controlled under the Single Convention. Ultimately, however, the Commission voted against any amendments. Therefore, any extracts and tinctures of cannabis, including hemp oil, remain controlled under the Single Convention and are not to be used for non-medicinal purposes. And so having had two submissions with two specifically different pieces of information in it and the benefit of the briefing, I went back to the Hemp Association and said to them, this is what's been shared. Did they have an update in terms of their submission? And they had their submission at the time was fairly strongly worded, where they said, the Hemp Association wrote in their submission, upon reading the final report, we're disappointed to see that no real action is being taken by the government at this time to implement the proposed improvements that they had in their original submission. And I think it's important to put on the record, my understanding is, having spoken to a representative of the association, that they remain disappointed in no action on that. It is their belief, or as I understand their position, that there's a difference of interpretation or a potential difference in how that action at the 2020 meeting occurred, that there are jurisdictions around the world that have progressed and made changes nonetheless of that meeting, and that there are some states in Australia that have actually determined to push on in any case, given their own interpretation. So Tasmanian Labor support this amendment bill. We recognise that the amendments that are made are practical, common sense, administratively do support the changes as outlined, but would be keen to see more work done on the requests, expectations of the industry to see what more can be done to progress more significant step changes to create better outcomes for industry in Tasmania. Thank you.
Thank you. The Honourable